Hello and welcome, one and all. It's a delight to have you along. We've got a packed show this evening, actually. Quite a lot we want to get through. Not least talking about boom and bust. Two graphs here. Any of the eagle-eyed among you might spot what these are, if you can spot what the axes are. But the top one here is electrification over the years in Britain on our railways. And you can see that there is this cyclic boom and bust. The bottom one is rolling stock. They're not to the same axis. It'd be nice to line them up, wouldn't it? That'd be fun. And you can see the same. Oh, look, it does actually line up quite nicely, because what's the peak here? 2002. Okay, well, not really. The peak here is 2018, though, which is indeed the peak of electrification. So you'd see, once again, boom, bust. So this is not good for all sorts of reasons we'll get into. We're going to be going through the Transport Select Committee's report on how to tackle boom and bust in the rail sector specifically. There's also a fun bit of news for us to get through. So a bit of a packed show tonight, and I'm looking forward to you joining in with the fun. Firstly, to our Patreon supporters, thank you so much. You are the ones who allow this to happen. Without further ado, welcome to tonight's Rail Natter. And as the Intercity 225 fades away... Now, who remembers the Stewart Review? We went through this at a fairly recent episode. It did not score well as a document, and it was looking into the problems with HS2, the latest in a long line of reports doing the same thing. And in response to what I say were largely the weaknesses within the Stewart Review, we came up with a kind of the Rail Natter kind of document, the kind of list of things that were problems specifically for HS2. So the 4 key challenges for HS2. These are useful to frame our thinking around boom and bust. So I just want to go through them again. So the issue with cost, it's relevant to one of the news items as well, relating to Northern Powerhouse Rail. So the 4 things that are critical to get right, 4 S's in fact. The first is strategy. So planning the whole rail system based on long-term needs. The second is scope, which means that you can split a major project into chunks that can be managed and delivered. Or you might say, don't have a project at all, have it as a rolling program. Scale is that you have a pipeline of work that enables the supply chain to retain skills, bring down costs. And then the 4th one is subcontractors, which is about consolidating the shape of the construction industry, which again is a thing you can do if there is a predictable pipeline of work. Subcontracting is about risk management for the headline, the head of a contracting organization. So if you have no long-term look ahead, you want to outsource as much risk as possible. You want to minimize the number of staff on the books that are your liability, because if work gets cancelled, you want to be able to downsize your organization, or rather, just simply not employ subcontractors so that your organization stays about the same size through thick and thin. Now, you don't need that to happen if you've got a much longer term look ahead. So these are all key elements of why HS2 costs so much, but also key things we need to bear in mind as we go through tonight's document, the TSC report. So before we go into the TSC, firstly, what is the TSC? To which I hand over to myself from a few years ago.
Forgive me, but how does that square with government policy? I mean, isn't the government supposed to be in favour of modal shift?
Absolutely, yes. I wouldn't want to prejudice the decisions that are being made at the DFT, or should I say the Treasury. But yes, that's indeed the analysis undertaken by Mott MacDonald to support the conclusions of the IRP made the explicit statement that the proposals as they currently stand will not allow government to achieve its own strategic objectives.
So yeah, that's the Transport Select Committee. I've given them evidence multiple times and appeared to give oral evidence once for the Integrated Rail Plan. I've been in Parliament a few times giving evidence, but for the TSC, that was the one time. I look forward to going down again at some point, and who knows, perhaps I'll be in a different position at some point later this year to do a bit more of that sort of thing when I'm a little less snowed under with all of the many things. More on that later. So there are 2 reports that have been brought out February this year, I think they both came out. One of them was about the Railways Bill, and is an assessment by the TSC of the Railways Bill. The TSC, the Transport Select Committee, also known as the Transport Committee, increasingly seeing the word select being taken out, because to be fair, it's a jargon word that doesn't mean anything to us. So it's the Transport Committee, with it part of the functioning of government, but essentially it's a cross-party collection of MPs who assess stuff and do inquiries and collect evidence and publish reports to challenge government policy. So the Railways Bill one we'll get to later, but the one we're going to talk about tonight is the Rail Investment Pipelines Ending Boom and Bust report, the 7th report of the 24-26 session of the Transport Committee. So it's going to be good to pick into that. This is the one that we're going to be looking at, and it's I've listed out the recommendations that we'll go through in a bit more detail, but we will flick through the PDF itself, because yes, this is a classic PDF page turn. You love to see it, and in doing so, it'll lay out some of the challenges. There's some really good evidence within there to kind of back up why boom and bust is a bad thing, and then we'll interrogate some of these recommendations and work out whether these are enough, and indeed whether the committee has been perhaps rigorous enough in its challenges to government. So quite a bit for us to Sue Weston saying you should be in Parliament, not just appearing at Westminster. Hello, everyone in the chat, by the way. I've been neglecting you of late as I'm trying to tighten up the show, but I'm still paying attention, always spotting when you're shouting at things. It's a 2-year session. I know, Gareth, all the nerds out there. Hello to all the Greens, by the way, you lovely Greens who are watching specifically. Can we flick through Mandelson, his PDS? No, but the news is fun on that front. I've been actively neglecting. I'm also ignoring Glasgow Central because there's not really much to report other than crikey, and will Glasgow stop burning down its key, its kind of main feature buildings? So this document, let's get stuck in, shall we? So it's first of all, I'm going to go big face and say hello. It's nice to see you all. There's quite a lot we want to. It's not a huge document, but there's a decent amount of detail. So I'm going to try and surf through the detail, pick out the key features, and then we'll get into those recommendations. So here we have it. Here's the document. I've got my mouse up so you can see that going on. It's the usual thing. Transport Committee. It lists off all the people. It's currently chaired by Ruth Cadbury of Labour. Dr. Scott Arthur is in there as well. He's kind of a friend of the show. So is Ollie Glover. Hello, Ollie. If you're watching this, hello, Ollie. A few people in here. Who get stuck in. Lawrence Turner. There are a few friends of Rail Natter in here, actually, which is quite interesting. So those of you who I've outed, I do apologise. Anyway, so there's the... there is the committee itself, and they go through, and they've got lots of clerks to provide support. So the document is structured into understanding boom and bust, the need for the pipeline, so evidence supporting this. One of the reasons I bring these PDFs up is because in the work that some of you are doing out there, because the people who watch Rail Natter, there's a wide range of you, and lots of you are in the thick of this sort of thing, whether it is you're within local government or regional government or urban government, and trying to make cases. Well, here's a document that has lots of nice evidence for you to cite, or whether you're in policy or whether you're in campaigning and activism. Again, evidence here for you to cite. So that's one of the reasons I go through these things. And for those of you who don't do any of that stuff, hopefully it's still just quite interesting looking at through some of this data to get an idea of the picture. So stable and steady pipelines and why they're important. Existing tools to enable a stable pipeline and whether they work. And then insulating the pipeline from instability, to how to stop the current situation where we have this extremely unstable rug pull type arrangement with investment of all scales and sizes. So yeah, let's get into it, shall we? So as ever, we skip through the summary because we don't need to read the summary. So we're going to also, I should say, that was fairly gentle, just in case you are photosensitive. Sometimes when I go through these PDFs, it's a bit flashy. So take care if you're out there and you're photosensitive. So investment in rail infrastructure, fine. Oh, come on, look at this. This is scrappy. Come on, Word document. Whoever the clerk is, you're probably someone I've chatted to, and you're probably lovely. Just sort that formatting out. Anyway, railway network is complicated. Okay, fine. Yeah, we know that. GBR will inherit complicated. Okay, whatever. A case of boom and bust. Right. Network Rail, talking about the organisation. This is sort of RIA representing a huge number of companies across the supply chain, stating there have been years of fluctuating investment. And a recent period of exceptional uncertainty. We have been making redundancies across the industry, and it's frightening, frankly. Noel Travis told us that in his nearly 37 years in the railway industry, he had frequently observed boom and bust, but that what we are experiencing at the moment is way beyond anything I've experienced in my career. Yeah, it's nice. Fair play, Noel. That's blunt and appropriate, because that is the situation. Mike C is saying it'd be nice if the TSC had any influence over policy whatsoever. Yeah, quite. Occasionally they agreed. They should have more of a role, frankly, but it's important that these reports get created and they do provide an evidence base for others to stand up and shout. So lots of 64% of rail business leaders believe the rail supply industry would contract over the next year, with 85% expecting a hiatus in work due to uncertainty over enhancement or major project budgets. Many reported they'd be prioritising work outside of the UK as a result. 62% said they expected to freeze or slow recruitment in response, and 34% expected to make redundancies. That's a bleak paragraph. That's a really important paragraph, and it is a bleak paragraph. So no matter what you hear from top boss welders, like some of the people who might appear giving evidence in this document, although I intend to skip over most of his what he has to say because it's mostly useless guff. No matter what you read, that paragraph is the blunt truth of the matter. Like, we are in a frightening slowdown of activity, and it's harming our industry to levels that we've not seen for nearly 40 years. It's grim. Yes, there are big investment projects underway, but the volume of work actually is, those big investment projects are spaced out over a huge time period, so their annual spend is not necessarily that much more than a smaller project, the likes of which would be spread across, would be having multiples of across the country. So when people say, but we've got two or three major schemes, East West Rail, HS2, TRU, it's like, yeah, but each of those, the annual spend is about as much as any major enhancements project, maybe perhaps a little bit more. And the point is that we, in the past, have had lots of those sorts of major enhancement projects happening across the country, and we don't now. So yeah, so fine, lovely. A recent announcement have given hope. Only if you're part of the government have they given anyone hope. So fine. Yeah. Look at this. They're like clinging on to phase 2, the first phase of Northern Pass, doodle what's it. Would prioritise upgrades and electrification east of the Pennines, progress the business case for the Leamside line in North East, whatever. Phase 2, build a new line between Liverpool and Manchester, and Phase 3 would focus on further improvements across Pennine connection between Manchester, Sheffield and Leeds. Just words though, like as we went through in the previous episode about NPR, it's nothing, it's just a fugazi. So additionally, the Secretary of State for Transport announced that government's long-term aim was to see a full new north-south line from Birmingham to Manchester, but that it would not be a revival of HS2. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Right. So, yes, let's keep crunching through. Hello to everyone. Remember to @me, by the way. Christopher Kimber. Hello, Chris Kimber. Right, that's probably fine. Hi, Gareth. First time watching one of your streams live. Come across your videos recently. Really enjoyed what you've shared. Many previous Rail Natter videos to catch up on still. Yeah, my little short videos have been grabbing a few people, which is why I've been doing them. Delight to have you along. Do @me in the chat because it appears red and it means, yeah, exactly as Gareth is telling you to in the chat. If you put it in red, I'll spot it and I can say hello. So the inquiry, they've gone through... they've got these nicely signposted conclusions, so sort of key sentences in these little pink boxes, which are kind of useful. So the inquiry kind of collected a load of data, fine. So the need for a steady and stable pipeline. So efficiency and cost, boom and bust profile, and investment makes improvements to the railway less efficient and ultimately more expensive. Very basic, straightforward sentence. Electrification is cited here as a key example. RIA also highlighting a collaborative alliance model used by National Highways that provides 10 years of work certainty for suppliers as having produced over 20 million of cost savings. Sure. Once again, the roads seem to do a far better job of this. Arcadis are getting involved. My old employer, the old employer. Progress of electrification cited as a particularly acute case of boom and bust. Arcadis detailed the failings of past initiatives such as the National Electrification Programme that was launched in CP4. Arcadis told us that the industry had ramped up capability and capacity for this multi-line programme, but after significant cost and time overruns in one project, scope had been reduced and EP ultimately cancelled. Look, it's the electrification kilometres per year thing down here. So you can see it. It's the graph that I put up earlier, just with the 2023, with the end of the 2018 drop, and it just drops to 0, you'll notice, which is frightening. And also then Germany there has the Ziggy thing. This is an old Dolphin special actually created for RIA, which is nice. Let's see what Haynes says, though. So Andrew Haynes, at the time of the inquiry, was Chief Executive Network Rail. Haynes argued that some of the delivery problems with GWEP arose from ramping up industry from a low base in the first place. What we had was almost a generation of no electrification. I could do the Welsh, couldn't I? As a result, we did not have a skills base in the country that had optimised it. Our standards as Network Rail at the time turned out to be very risk averse and drove costs. Our contracting was quite immature. Then, because of the political imperative, we ended up contracting too soon and bearing a lot of risk. Yeah, I think the key thing in there, don't be fooled by material costs and design. Actually, the main immaturity within the industry, and continues to be the main immaturity, and frankly, almost corrupt levels of money wasted, is in our contracting strategies. The money spent in building up immense and complex tender processes that take years and years and cost hundreds. The industry would save, Network Rail, but broader, the railway industry would save hundreds of millions of pounds a year if it tightened up its contracting strategies and spent much less time doing that. So the next one is so electrification. Okay, fine. So lots of discussion about electrification. Fine. Not a problem. So I won't dwell on electrification because we've gone through this so many times. Why is road being prioritised over rail? Well, there is a story. I saw the live stream I recently did with High Speed Rail Alliance. Insightful stuff. Thanks for sharing. Max Transit, an absolute pleasure. So jobs, crucial. A consistent pipeline of work is absolutely crucial for protecting jobs. Yep, fine, agreed. Vulnerability of larger employers to boom and bust. Alstom is a key example, so we kind of get into rolling stock. RMT talked about the fact that government only got involved after a kind of a concerted campaign by the unions, businesses, and local politicians to commit to funding the expansion of the Crossrail fleet, the Elizabeth Line trains, some additional 345s. RMT continued to input into redundancies at depots as well. Newcliffe, the fact that the whole train manufacturing and maintenance chain is severely impacted. So, major problems. So what else do we have here? Lots of stuff about workforce planning and skills. So Elaine Clark is brilliant, Chief Exec of Rail Forum. Again, talking about skills, staffing, associated pressures, skills shortages. Who did we get? Did Andy come in? Let's have a look. Who was speaking for? Oh, it's just straight from NSAR. Okay, fair enough. Okay, fine. And Neil Robertson's very good from NSAR. Lots of other things. Lots of other kind of things here. Basically talking about skills and the challenges. The fact that innovation is extremely difficult in this environment, because less is spent on R&D because we have such a boom and bust process. So you can see, inconsistent investment stream results in whole generations of innovations being skipped, thus making the UK a much less attractive place in which to invest in the continuous improvement of systems and the upskilling of personnel. You're kind of seeing the picture being painted here. Not because it's the next facilitating investment by the private sector, which is a factor. If there is going to be private sector investment, there needs to be a stable. Government can't do the hokey cokey on projects left, right, and centre. And likewise, the challenges for investment by the devolved authorities. So just immense pressures. This is bad. We don't need to go through this. You can see that this is just a widespread consensus that stability and getting rid of boom bust is critical for us to get anywhere. So what about the existing tools to attempt to not have boom and bust? So renewals and enhancements, to kind of go through it, this is in control periods, although we're in the last of the control periods. The next one's going to be FP1, Funding Period 1, which is the equivalent of CP8. Some of us might keep calling them control periods, but anyway. And these, in theory, give a 5-year agreed period for investment in renewals and enhancements. The trouble is, within those, there's all sorts of challenges. It'd be interesting to see what they pick up on here, but within those, often priority changes from 5 year to 5 years. So you end up with, you lose some of the viability of that. Actually, 5 years is not great for quite a lot of stuff. And also the contrivance of what is a capital project versus what is renewals, what is enhancements, what is upgrades, and the semantics of that based on what they are allowed to have within a control period versus what has to be part of the external capital project budget is messy as hell, and really inconsistent. So they've gone through here and they talk about the rail network enhancement pipeline, which was the thing that was published, that was not published for ages, published once and then not published for ever again. So we'll pick up the RNEP later. So Network Rail emphasised to us that the distinctions in funding routes between renewals and enhancements did not necessarily translate into distinctions between delivery programmes or supply chain capabilities. From a delivery perspective, many projects are a mixture of renewals and enhancements. This is natural. The most cost-effective time to deliver enhancements to the network is when the relevant assets are due for renewal anyway. Such projects are delivered, and often can only sensibly be delivered as a single integrated project, even if the project is funded from 2 or more sources. And from a supply chain perspective, many of the capabilities and skills needed for renewals and enhancement work are the same. So it's kind of saying that, as I was just talking about, the idea, the contrived lines here don't make much sense. It would make much more sense for the railway to decide where it's going to spend the money and not have to care about that distinction, so that it can decide we're going to be spending this money on work that is going on, whether it's renewals, enhancements in this area, and care not for those distinctions. So there's a lot of stuff here about control periods. The DFT told us that regulated control period process ensured a very high degree of certainty and stability for the railway and its supply chain. Haynes said, "I describe the control period process as a generous gift. There are very few parts of the public sector that have 5 years of funding certainty. It is not perfect by any means, but it is something that I think we ought to fight tooth and nail to keep." We heard the view, however, that the control period process did not remove peaks and troughs in such spending, even over each 5-year settlement. Rail Forum told us that control periods created artificial fractures and start and end points to funding, and added cost and reduced productivity for activities that did not fit neatly into 5-year blocks. Absolutely. RIA pointed out that Control Period 7 had seen an extremely slow start to spending on the contract since April 24, combined with a backlog of work in the previous control period, meaning many suppliers faced unexpected reductions in work. Rail Forums ask, as a fixed 5-year funding, which we have, but better spent and better profiled. Haynes then kind of admits that this had, that Network Rail had not been good at transitioning from one control period to the next. Some other guy acknowledges that changeover in control periods have been a regular issue, with there usually being a temporary dip in the flow of work. All right. DFT Director General Alex Hines, previous guest of the show, concluded, "Cliff edge is a bit strong, if I'm honest. Is it perfect? No. Is it better than not having funding certainty for 5 years? Absolutely." I mean, I don't disagree with that, but there's a lot more the industry could be doing to smooth those transitions between, renewal control periods out. Elaine Clark argued that while in theory control periods would give companies 5 years worth of certainty, in fact this situation only pertained at the very start. By the time you get to the years 3 and 4, that visibility is down to probably 12 months. She suggested that a model of 5 plus 2 years worth of planning could mitigate this and bring about smoother transitions between control periods. Haynes outlined a new approach being taken in Network Rail's southern region, where they'd effectively entered into a 10-year partnership with full visibility of the pipeline across that period, despite the control period break in the middle, with the aim being to give the supply chain more influence over how and when work was planned. If that works, it'll be transformational. So, yeah, very interesting. So here's the annual spend. This is a really nice graph that shows control period spend in cash prices. So you can see increasing from, CP1 was from kind of privatization start. You can see the funding go up to a peak in 2003-04, dropped a bit in CP3, dropped even more in CP4. CP5 was always talked about as this giant explosion, but actually it wasn't that dramatic an increase. A lot of the spending increase in 3-4 was probably renewals budget for all the post-Hatfield rail renewals. OR identified a renewals backlog, and then, so you see the CP5 wasn't that dramatic, and then we saw an increase because of COVID, a big spike in the money that went to the renewals expenditure and how much we were spending, and then it's dropped off through CP7 with a kind of a drop at that point. So you can see this graph can be a bit misleading because it looks like there's record funding levels. Triple lock the control period funding, says Omega Mesdal. Yeah, well, quite. Difference between enhancements and upgrades, semantic, Ironman trains, utterly semantic. Like an enhancement versus a major project, it's just lots of semantics based on which pots of money, which people get to filch from. Vice Chair of Rail Forum, Michelle Craven-Falker, argued that while industry recognised the importance of having such a settlement, the way that money was then released by contracts had led to a really difficult period of time for the supply chain, in particular the most recent control period. I'm not going to read his words because I don't care. Haynes noted the cumulative effect of inflation were also heavily impacting the supply chain. So like you can see that control periods are imperfect, and the transition between them is still a major pressure, and that actually it doesn't provide the 5-year look ahead, because it's not, you end up with a mad rush at the end of it and then a mad panic to change over contracts. So actually, this is why you need a rolling 5-year look ahead rather than a static 5-year locked-in period. And then the RNEP. We get to the RNEP. So this is the Rail Network Enhancements Pipeline launched by the DfT in 2018. I'll skip all of this because this is waffle. What actually ended up happening is that it was... Oh, by the way, the budget... RNEP is funded periodically via spend and review settlements. The budget, which has been on average around $2 billion a year, is not ring-fenced and can be changed by government at any time. Interesting. And it was published once in October 2019, and then no update was published since then. So that is... How many years now? That's on it's 5.5 to 6... Well, it's 6 years. It's easily 6 years. It's over 6.5 years we're now. 6.5 years since the last update. Absolutely dismal. Haynes had this to say about RNEP. He said, because it is a flawed proposition, by which I mean that it is owned politically and is therefore subject to shifting political priorities, it is not a strategy for the railway. A new politician will come in wanting to do something new, restoring your railway, for example, and it just gets added to the list, but nobody wants to take anything off, so very quickly the numbers don't add up. The easiest way not to expose that is to not publish the pipeline. So completely useless catastrophe of a approach there. Brilliant. So, so this is just a mess. I'm not going to dwell on it because it's just a shambles. So there's a load of conclusions and reviews, and then spend and reviews. So let's see what they say about the spend and reviews. They talk. These are the spend and reviews and budgets. These are what we'd call budgetary events, budget events, which they shouldn't be because I hate them. I think that they should not be a thing. They should just, again, there shouldn't be a budget event. There should just be a constant review of spending priorities and adjustments accordingly, rather than dumping all the eggs into one big press releasable event. So we asked the minister why certain schemes had been cancelled following the spend review and what criteria decisions had been made. Hendy said something, which was that the department simply did not have enough funding available to do everything we wanted, or maybe fight for some. Hines said the department had focused on the schemes that were ready to proceed, delivered strong value for money in line with their strategic objectives. Schemes which had been in effect cancelled or paused. As a result, the spending review would be kept under active review and were strong candidates for future progression. Okay. Hines concluded that the outcome of the spending review was that we have visibility now of all the capital expenditure in rail for 4 years, plus 9 months of the financial year we're in. That is beyond the 3-year visibility that organisations are asking for in workforce planning. Those two recent developments, spending review and us publishing the pipeline of road and rail projects, have made a big difference to the ability of the supply chain to plan. Yeah, but that's now, it's not moving, so that number, that look ahead is just reducing year on year. So I agree with Alex about that, but it's not in their gift to do anything else about it. They're defending something they have no control over, which is, although they could push for that to be resolved, of course. And then the UK infrastructure pipeline, which is made up, overseen by the thing that was the NIC and some other stuff, the merged up Quango that's basically a big PFI pushing ex-Treasury, well, continues to be a Treasury body, now called NISTA. Underpinning its 10-year infrastructure strategy. Remember the 10-year infrastructure strategy that didn't have anything in it? Yeah, that one. The Minister for Rail, that guy, told us some stuff which we don't care about, but basically that pipeline is setting out some anticipated spend, status of projects, and that's about it. But the relationship between that and the RNEP is unclear. Lots of gaps in data. Pipeline's not comparable year on year. Lots of issues with that already. No doubt, because it's a Treasury body, so it's going to be dismal. And then they pick out rolling stock investment as a key. The Department of Network Rail are kind of being a bit. They're disputing the characterisation of rail investment as boom and bust. Sorry, wrongly, but they are acknowledging that rolling stock is an area where the critique was largely valid, and that the impacts on the supply chain are horrific. And there we go. So it's funny enough. So I use my graphs Noel's graph and my graph, but this is their graph for orders placed on mainline passenger rolling stock. It'd be interesting to then compare this to my one that I created using my data. It'd be an interesting comparison. Anyway, we're not going to dwell on that because time is short. So how did the TSE decide that you insulate the pipeline from that instability? Because there is political decision making. That is a thing that continues. So how do you manage that? Well, let's see. Lots of promises, lots of discussions and promises and this and that. discussion about Network North and the funding reviews and how that just no one treated with any respect whatsoever. Greater consistency, how it might be achieved. Oh, look, Stephen Barber's popping up, Chief Exec of the Railway Engineering Institution, as it is now called. Stephen Barber says, I might turn the question back to the politicians because they are the people who are driving some of this. How greater consistency might be achieved over time in political decision-making for rail investment. Most, by their own admission, did not have a concrete proposal. I've got a couple. I should have got involved in this one, I admit, but I've just been too busy to get stuck into into this stuff. I would have loved to get stuck into this into the TSC inquiry. Finding the balance between flexibility and certainty. Okay, fine. We'll get into some of this in the recommendations, basically. Strategic direction is lacking. This is a thing that picks up. No government in the 21st century has yet published a comprehensive transport strategy for England. Whoops. That's a thing that I've said before. Interesting. Haynes said, successive governments over the last 10 or 15 years have chosen not to have a rail strategy and be clear on what they want from the railway, and therefore to plan investment, be that in track or in train, that supports it. So contrasting this approach with that taken in Scotland, which he described as much more strategic, underpinning commitments to electrification, decarbonisation, reducing inequality, network expansion. Recent funding pressures might have resulted in slippage in timescales, but without a fundamental shift in priorities, and concluded that Scotland was a good example of where we can demonstrate better outputs from the system because of a strategic approach. Stephen Barber comes in again, who's our chief exec for the RailEI, argued that a long-term strategy which embodied consensus on the purpose of railways could act as an important protection against shifting political priorities. He cited Switzerland, Austria and Ireland as having pursued consistent transport strategy despite changes in political governance. Tasty. So there's a load of recommendations over that. Overcoming fragmentation and micromanagement. So this is a chance for GBR to come in and say, aren't we going to be marvellous? Contributors to our inquiry voiced frustration with what was typically described as the overbearing influence of HM Treasury on the progress of projects through the pipeline. This applied both to an apparent insistence by the Treasury on signing off on relatively minor projects and its indirect influence through the frameworks such as the Green Book, which informs the DfT's own appraisal frameworks. Haynes said that since the reclassification of Network Rail's debt in 2014, Treasury kept a very tight grip on transport spending, and that between 2019 and early 2024, every single enhancement scheme was subject to Treasury approval and scrutiny. He recalled, I do not think that you could get approval for a footbridge without individual Treasury approvals. I'll let others draw conclusions on whether that's a good idea or not. So, conclusions and recommendations. It goes through these, and we will pull these. I'm going to pull the recommendations out, right? So we're going to, rather than going through these, there's all the minutes, all the witnesses, that's the end of your PDF. So what we're going to do now is go through I'm going to go through the various kind of recommendations in turn. So the first of these, we'll go through them, and by the end of this, there's quite a few recommendations. There's 13, 14, possibly 15. Quite a few of them in a big pile. I've summarized what each one is, and then the text straight out the document is underneath if you want to compare as you go back through if you pick this YouTube video up and catch up and want to kind of review. But quite a few recommendations. And after that, we're going to sort of say, are these viable as a whole, as a single unit of recommendations? And does this plug the gap? Does this solve the problem? So let's have a look. So the first here is review the CP7 spending profile. So get an understanding of the problems associated with the control period, with control period 7 and the transition into control period 7, right? Okay, it doesn't really get as much in the long term. I suppose it's partly to inform future funding periods, but okay, fine. So I wonder what government's going to say to that. By the way, government generally will always provide a response to a transport committee inquiry, and sometimes that involves saying, yes, we'll do that. Most of the time it involves government going, that's nice, dear, and not saying much else. So that's the first of the recommendations. So let's go for the next one, shall we? Recommendation number 2 is to update and maintain the rail network enhancements pipeline. Well, that's kind of obvious, isn't it? Actually have this, because at the moment it doesn't exist. It's a collection of letters associated with a thing that doesn't actually exist at all. So next one, number 3. Include 5 years of funded projects in RNEP. So make sure that RNEP has a rolling, and they describe this, 5 years into at least 5 years into the future on a rolling basis. That's good. And an indicative pipeline of up to 15 years beyond that. Strong recommendation, this one. If the RNEP's going to be a thing, this is what's needed to make it useful. So, number 4. recommendation 4, RNEP projects must be viable. So this is a bit of a them wanting to, it's like, well, yeah, sure. I would say it's less about them being viable. For me, this is like, well, I don't care about like sure, as in that you can build them, but like it's more about what's important, what's the critical stuff that maximizes hitting those objectives, and you can't really judge what viability is without having a strategy. But we'll get to that momentarily. So that was number 4. Number 5, recommendation number 5 is that the RNEP should promote privately funded projects. I have to say 4 and 5 feel like the Treasury people or indeed government getting stuck in and trying to include extra recommendations. But it should promote privately funded projects. It's, you know what, there are projects that should be privately funded by housing developments or whatever it happens to be. And it's very difficult for that to happen when there isn't clarity on a pipeline of work. So RNEP being used as a mechanism to promote these projects is an opportunity. You know, if you've got all this stuff in RNEP, then private organizations might be interested in getting stuck into those. I say that slightly cynically because I don't suspect they will, but you might have a situation where if you have a new line or even just a new station that a housing development might be nearby, then that opportunity for funding potentially exists. Recommendation 6 is that it should include and be used to leverage devolved projects as well. So it should absolutely include projects being delivered by devolved authorities for full industry and visibility. So that's a kind of sensible enough recommendation. And number 7, RNEP must be updated straight after budgetary events. So when there is a budget or a spending review, RNEP must be instantly updated, ideally as part of the releases on that day. This is critical. It can't be a dither or delay. This is absolutely critical. So, yeah, Z-Boy Zoe is saying viable is entirely dependent on how hard you're willing to try. Yes, exactly, yeah. RNEP, this is critical. This is absolutely, again, it becomes a useless waste of space if it is no longer a representative of the government's current position. This is a good one, which is kind of the Transport Committee going, so what the is the UK infrastructure pipeline? What is that? What's its relationship with anything? My preference, of course, is that you disband NISTA. You just completely get rid of it. It has no purpose whatsoever. You just disband the thing, distribute any potentially useful functions out to the departments. But ideally, it wouldn't exist. So this man's legacy can be completely obliterated. Even so, if the UK infrastructure pipeline is going to be a thing that exists, then it absolutely needs to be completely coherent with the RNEP. And that there's no evidence that there is any attempt to make those two coherent, not least the fact the RNEP continues to be 6+ years out of date. Number 9, publish the bloody rolling stock strategy is this recommendation, which is absolutely right and fair enough. This work is urgent. Yeah. So when I'm paraphrasing, but I'm also accurately paraphrasing. And number 10 related to that is an interesting one, is standardize the passenger fleet. This is kind of an interesting secondary sort of, if you like, slightly out of scope recommendation, but within the long-term rail strategy, which we'll get to in a minute, there's a statement, there should be a policy statement on its intention to limit the proliferation of rolling stock types. This is a very heavy, un-laissez-faire capitalism type move of only have a limited number of rolling stock and therefore only have a limited number of suppliers? Or will it be that suppliers build to license? It's an interesting suggestion. I don't necessarily disagree with it, but it's very, go back to British Rail Engineering Limited type suggestion. I'm interested. It's one that there is a bit more writing around this one in the report, but not a huge amount. Number 11 is publish the bloody long-term rail strategy. So the other document is, the wording they use, it is long past time that such a vision is set out for the railways. Long-term rail strategy. Will we actually see one, and will it be any good? No. I'm telling you now that long-term rail strategy will not be any good. But its very existence, if it ever comes to existence, its very existence means that it will be something that can be improved on, shouted about, interrogated. So having it existing is a major useful step forward, even if, as I fully expect, it will be absolute dog mess. So recommendation number 12 is that everything needs to talk to everything else. This is a kind of a biggie. This is like a bit of a, the strategy, the long-term rail strategy should relate to everything else we've talked about and all the projects and rolling stock strategy, and it should all be coherent, which is not wrong. But it's also they've not managed... So much has not been managed that, they're absolutely spot on. But in a way, the way this works is by you're better to get GBR moving first and empower GBR to do this stuff. if GBR is suitably powered. Which we'll get to in kind of the last recommendation, I believe. So the long-term rail strategy needs a 30-year horizon and must be free from meddling, which is, yeah, spot on. I agree with all of that. I think one of the interesting things, we recommend the Secretary of State be required to lay the strategy before Parliament, and that where the Secretary of State makes substantive changes, like cancelling HS2, it be required to be laid again in its amended form. So this is kind of saying you can't do what you did with HS2, which was a reminder, completely political decision, nothing to do with costs, nothing to do with anything other than party politics and electoralism, electioneering specifically. Putting this in would be a measure, not a very strong one, frankly, but it would at least be a measure to provide some form of a buffer to stop government from just willy-nilly changing and retreating on project commitments, on strategic commitments to rail investment. The thing is, they could still ignore this. Like, it's going to be interesting to see how this could manifest statutorily. It'll be interesting to see what government's response to this will be. The last here ties to this, of course, which is that... Oh, you're right. Sue Weston, you're spot on. I forgot to mention the really important thing about the rolling stock thing, which is standardise the passenger fleet. The key sentence here is, of course, level boarding being mentioned explicitly. You're right. Hello, chat. I love you all. You're brilliant. To achieve better value for money and an improved experience for passengers, including through more widespread level boarding. This is the small number of standard train families for use across the national network. Improved, including through more widespread level boarding. That's a key element in standardising the passenger fleet, which is really nice. So, sorry, you're spot on. A key point to raise. So recommendation 14, which I believe is the last recommendation, is that Great British Railways, or whatever the Integrated Railway Organisation is going to be called, BR2, must be sufficiently autonomous. That's a key recommendation here, and I would agree that it is a critical recommendation, and one that makes me extremely nervous. We expect political leaders to set its strategic direction and hold it accountable for delivery, but micromanagement would work against the best interests of passengers and industry. The department must be clear about the level of autonomy it expects GBR to exercise in enhancements planning, and how ministerial oversight will be exercised in a way that does not jeopardise the investment pipeline. Absolutely, it should not be the business of... Also, a lifetime public service ban on Andrew Gilligan, specifically, Katie. I absolutely agree with that. I can think of better things to do with Andrew Gilligan. For example, but be a bit messy. Benji Mouse 42. What do you think about new high-speed lines being built to a loading gauge that allows for double-deck carriages? Oh, Benji Mouse, come to the bonus episode for those sorts of questions where we can roll around in the mud for those sorts of questions. Yeah, for those of you new to the stream, if you've got a fun question, then do bring that to the bonus episodes because it's much more freestyle. Here, we must stay focused, and doing staying focused requires me to ask the final question, going through those 14 recommendations. Will any of it work? Yes. If the government picks up some of those recommendations and enacts them, sure. Government has a huge incentive to ignore almost all those recommendations, though. Yes, it's producing a couple of the documents in there, but is it going to update the RNEP? Is the strategy going to be useful or robust? Its existence will be important, but will it actually be a viable document? And is GBR going to have any autonomy whatsoever? Those are major questions. And even if all of those recommendations are followed to the full, I still don't think it is enough. I still believe that there is a need for a high-level legislative imperative, such as through mode shift being encoded in law, in much the same way that we have for the Climate Change Act 2008, without a key, core, driving governmental imperative that is impossible to evade. Government will find ways of worming its way into cancelling left, right, and centre. The key flaw here, though, and we'll get to we will get to the scoring momentarily, but the key flaw here is the lack of addressing the Treasury challenge head on. Yes, we saw some discussion about Treasuries being a problem, but it was not really engaged with heavily in the report. And actually, there needs to be a much more explicit drawing of NISTA as a hostile organisation rather than a favourable one. Its relationship with Treasury and the relationship with DFT and GBR, and that's lacking in this report. I think it should have been an explicit call out of Treasury's involvement and the extent to which Treasury needs to be withdrawn from, well, existence, but certainly the equation of committing the railway to its investment pipeline. So yeah, stay tuned in a minute because we will score this report and what I think of it. I don't always score Transport Committee reports, but this one I feel like I ought to. But first, oh yeah, that's right. The other report, by the way, I was going to say, is going to be coming up in the bonus tonight. So tonight's bonus episode will cover the other Transport Committee report on the Railways Bill, and I suspect there'll be some parallels between the two, which is why I've done them together. And so we get some time for a bit of news. The news tonight, first one, is really interesting little bit of relevant work being done by the IPPR, very much supporting some of the TSC's work there, but also just the outright abolition of Treasury. Central government holding back growth by blocking regional transport development, finds IPPR. 3 bullet points here. First, Treasury processes are blocking the development of new transport projects, says think tank. Empowering mayors will accelerate our ability to boost productivity and drive greater economic growth, says Mayor Helen Godwin. And IPPR recommends devolving control, funding and approval of transport projects to mayors. So that first one there, Treasury processes are blocking the development of new transport projects, which, by the way, subtext here, in turn, is holding back overall growth. So a reminder, the Treasury are one of the biggest, if not the biggest, blocker to growth, however you want to interpret that, in the economy. So let's have a look. So the next bit of news, actually, is painful, related to that and related to centralisation versus devolution, is a leaked memo from Keir Starmer to all of the cabinet members, in which the Prime Minister says, each of us will maintain a professional and respectful working relationship with our counterparts in devolved governments, but an overly deferential or laissez-faire approach to devolved government engagement almost inevitably creates political challenges or misses positive opportunities, by which he means we need every positive press release we can get, so deny devolved authorities, including mayors and Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, as much of them as possible. Grim. We should be confident in our ability to deliver directly in those nations, including through direct spending, even when devolved governments may oppose this. Ouch. That is bruising to have had that leaked. Also excruciating that he wrote it. It is dismal. This is some of the... one of the most embarrassing... Not really got much pickup. But this is awful. This is huge. Government, in theory, has its devolution agenda, but you can see here that Starmer doesn't give a slightest stuff. Dreadful. Absolutely dreadful. The implications of this should be apparent to all. So, talking of government fun, this is actually another report looking specifically at Northern Powerhouse Rail, which I'm sure we'll pick up, I think probably for a bonus episode, which is by the National Audit Office, usually a good time, National Audit Office reports. And they're looking at, this graphic is kind of interesting because it looks at scope of NPR and how scope has varied. So to the Network North scope, whatever that was the peak of the scope. And then we've seen the scope dropping away again in January 26. What's fun is that this is like new lines between Manchester and Leeds, and it says, yes, yes, yes. It's like, there are no proposals for new lines between Manchester and Leeds. It's just upgrades. So it's a bit of a cheeky way for the NAO to have clumped up the scope here, frankly. So yeah, it'd be interesting to pick through that one. So we'll have a look at that in the future, but basically the scope is severely at risk, says the NAO. It's not in a healthy state, NPR, at this point. This is one of the worst ticketing policy proposals I have ever seen. It is staggering. Just believe man in seat 61, because do not buy train tickets in advance. That's not don't buy advanced train tickets. That is, do not buy all of the other ticket types if you can at all help it. Well, just don't. Buy advanced tickets in advance, but buy off-peak, super off-peak, peak, whatever it is, buy them on the day. Because if you don't, and for some reason you can't travel, you will not get a refund. This is an insane, ridiculous policy that I hope ends up being reversed. It is completely, staggeringly offensive to most rail travellers. Firstly, they never publish the level of the fraud because the fraud levels are utterly insignificant compared to ticket revenue overall. And what this does is will result in less revenue because someone gets hit with I want to get a refund because my event is cancelled. Or, for example, you have a family or you're in a wheelchair, you're a disabled person, and therefore you have, perhaps you have, say you've got a friend in London, you're travelling down from Europe, you've got a friend in London, they've got kids who get sick, so you decide not to do it. Or you've got your friend in London has chronic pain issues and they decide that they've got fibromyalgia or something, and they're like, actually, I can't do this weekend, can we do it next weekend? If you'd book your tickets to get your seat booked, as any sensible person would, your tickets maybe cost you 100, 200 quid. I hope not, but 150 quid, say, or it's a family, maybe it is 200 quid. And you suddenly will not get a refund on those without realising it. A thing that you would absolutely assume you would be able to do if you haven't travelled using that ticket. This is staggering. Absolutely staggering. I am baffled that anyone thought this was a good idea. Just let people do fraud. It's so much less costly. Just let there be a limited amount of ticketing fraud. It doesn't matter. And as others pointed out, you don't even need, you can get rid of the ticketing fraud by just having more staff on trains to make sure more tickets get scanned. But that seems expensive to Treasury, doesn't it? Anyway. Wrexham, Shropshire and Midlands Railway, an absolutely dreadful use of capacity. So this, I think they ran a bunch of Mark 3s behind a 56 or something, or 57 or something, didn't they? I don't think it's an official service yet, but they're kind of wedging their way into run open access from Wrexham and Shrewsbury down the blinking West Coast main line into Euston. There is no capacity into Euston. So this is a hopeless use of capacity. Why on earth this has been allowed to progress as an open access operation, I do not know. I suspect from pressure from the ministry, but it just doesn't make any sense. It's just staggering. Just like, no, increase the frequency of the regional connector and then get those people to change onto the long distance service at Birmingham or elsewhere. This is not the right way to run a railway operation. Direct trains to every single city, every single town is a surefire way to create the most complex and impossible to operate railway possible. Extremely poor proposal. There's a pair of 57s. Why not just extend the Birmingham service to Shrewsbury? Because of the additional complexity of doing that. Like, suddenly you're importing all of the risk of delays, the risk of pressures on a lower category route onto the West Coast Main Line. There's a reason why it's a good idea not to do this. Irish Rail has a very limited refund on most tickets, but they're a lot cheaper. Yeah, Detour, absolutely. So this is another one which is kind of highlighting the point we've been talking about earlier, which is that construction is in a bad way and rail is not helping. So UK-wide construction is in a bad way, but the civil engineering market right now is slumping horrendously. Order books across the civil sector have slumped to their weakest position since 2020. There's a little graph in this article, which is quite interesting. I mean, it's a dreadful graph. They've done a tiny resolution and really difficult to read. But what they're kind of explaining here, why on earth it's in this order, I don't know. It should have been like best to worst. Basically, it's saying the electricity sector, as anyone who's working in civil engineering will know, the electricity sector and the airport sector are doing great because government is all about airports for some bizarre reason, and it's Ed is investing a huge amount in the grid, so there's a huge amount of national grid investment going on right now in the electricity sector. So gas, bizarrely enough, also doing pretty well for itself. Water and sewerage, only in a mad panic to fix all the holes. Meanwhile, preliminary works, etc., is doing very poorly. Railway is doing very poorly, and motorway and trunk roads doing very poorly. So so the railway is doing its bit to make sure that the construction sector is struggling. Not ideal situation, frankly. Right. So that was bleak. Let's make things more bleak by looking at some of the most bleak time series graphs I have ever seen. So this is across 6 countries, is a little graph, classic FT series of graphs by John Burns Murdoch here, showing government spending on older people in red versus public investment as a percentage of GDP. This is so bleak. So from 1970 to 2020, and you can see, or that goes beyond that, to the present year, you can see in every single one of these countries, Austria, France, Germany, Japan, UK, and the US. Okay, Japan, it's spectacular, the amount of money that's being spent on older people versus public investment. But just look at the UK. Look at that huge rise, and then this enormous drop. Like our investment, our GDP, our investment is some of the worst. Austria, it's kind of not quite so bad. You'd say it's kind of, investment has dropped, but the amount being spent on old age is not perhaps quite. So it's pensions, social security, health spending on people aged 65 plus, things of this nature that are counted as the that is, I would say, some of the most bleak stuff about our planet that you can imagine. Can we best it? Well, maybe, because there's some more bleak stuff we're going to talk about momentarily. But there's an interesting little paper that's been published recently, which is, I think, one of the first looking at this approach to policy, that a very similar policy to what the UK is pursuing right now. Why Biden-era clean energy investment policies had limited political returns. So, $200 billion in clean energy and manufacturing incentives, with the expectation that delivering material economic benefits could yield political dividends. Let's just read the highlighted quote here. For policies to affect politics, voters need to be able to trace them back to the responsible political actors, which is challenging in a complex information environment. Green spending channeled through private firms alone is unlikely to build. Not learn, because you seem intent on completely destroying your electoral base, which is absolutely fascinating, of course. Basically it's saying if you're channeling all of your public money through private companies to deliver, climate action, don't expect to see any political benefits from doing so. Those need to be large state bodies delivering major state benefits visible to everyone. Not good. Meanwhile, global warming is really not going our way, folks. So this is an interesting one from Dr. Genevieve Gunter. Warming has already melted so much ice in Greenland and Antarctica that Earth's rotation has slowed, its axis has shifted, slightly altering the length of the day and disrupting the precision of satellite tracking, GPS, and timekeeping. Oh boy. It's going well, folks. Oh, it's going well, folks.
Prices are higher than they used to be and higher than they need to be. Whether you look at rapid and ultra-rapid or what used to be called slow and fast and now has changed names. That, for us, is caused very directly by the increase in standing charges, which we've had to pass on. And the impact for drivers I talked about earlier, I think the practical impact is that we can no longer tell every potential EV driver that they will make a saving by switching. We used to be able to say that. We've proven that we can say that in the early 2020s. The increases in these charges mean that if you rely exclusively on rapid and ultra-rapid, which admittedly will not be many people because there's lots of different options, you will pay more than petrol. And that is not where we should be. It's not where we were. And given it's got a policy cause behind it, we think there's a policy solution too. The final thing I'll say is that we know affordability and the cost of ownership is a really important way of attracting people to make this switch. Lots of people have already made the switch for net zero reasons or environmental reasons. We now need to go to the next level, which is convince people to switch because they'll feel the benefit in their pocket.
So that is the Transport Committee again highlighting the increase in cost of electricity having a severe pressure on affordability of electric vehicles, and this is only going to get worse given the fact that we have paired all of our energy prices with electricity prices with gas prices. Like, we need to completely rebuild the way that we wholesale electricity prices in the country. Like, it's just staggering that we do it the way we do. It's completely upside down. So that's an interesting one. Talking of utter nonsense, this is fun. Let's have a bit of fun towards the end. Some slightly positive bits of ending news before we round things out. The Boring Company here posting enthusiastically that they have moved 82,000 passengers at the amazing insert exposition, construction trade show here. Now, 82,000 passengers. Ooh, that sounds impressive. Wait a minute. How long does this thing run for? And what time series is that? Moved 82,000 passengers in total, running from March 13th to 17th. Okay, well, this is saying it's 2029, but I'm going to assume it's nominally the same sort of time. So that's 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th. 5 days, 82,000. Okay, so what was that? 82,000 divided by 5, which is, okay, so 82,000 divided by 5 is, what is, 80, that's fine. Look what we're going to do now. 82,000 divided by 5 is 16,400 per day in total. So that's per direction. You're talking about around about 8,000 passengers per day. Oh boy. A reminder that Crossrail can move around about between 30 and 40,000 passengers per direction per hour. So just wow. And this is doing it inaccessibly in a horrible tunnel, low speed, extremely inefficiently from a materials and energy perspective. Staggering. Every time they post about how good they are, they show how bad they are. It's quite something. And I wanted to end on something really important, which is that there are zero, the possibility of having zero traffic deaths. Well, like, what was it? Yeah, my car in here is zero traffic death cities aren't just possible, they are, achieved, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, no, Helsinki just went a full year without a single traffic death. It is possible. Politico, your subheading is dreadful. The capital city is finished with car-related fatalities. Bop, 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 bop. Yeah, quite something. 400 per hour-ish, 10 buses, anyone Ironman trains works out. Yeah, exactly. So, these things are possible. Now, before we do that, let's just very quickly say thank you for watching. We are going to close out with the rating for the report, what I think of it, and then we'll say a couple of things. Let's get this report rated. So we went through the recommendations. We reckon that it is. It didn't say enough about the relationship between Treasury and DFT and what will be GBR. I think that, and didn't talk about NISTA. I think that's a shortcoming. So I think there's a lot of positive stuff in there. I'll be very interested to see what government's response is, but I think it can only get a 3 Pandrel clip rating. It's not going to get the 4 or 5 because I think it just lacks that interrogation of Treasury and its relationship. Hello everyone, welcome to the office. This is the home office. Don't worry about this. Oh, look, it's me. Exactly to the day 6 years ago, because this is the 300th episode of Rail Natter tonight. The official 300th episode is next week, and I'm hoping that we should have some fun next week. Katie, we might have to pull some stuff to make some stuff happen. Anyway, so yeah, 6 years of Rail Natter, nearly exactly 300 episodes if you include that, which was episode 0, which looks shonky as hell, doesn't it? It's quite fun to be reminded of where we started. Yeah, 6 years, everyone. 6 years. Thus as Sparta. There you go, Andy. 24242. There. I'll say nothing more on that one. To which end, we are chasing 25,000 subscribers this year, and we will damn well do it. So we've gone to 5953. We've got 9,000 remaining. Let's do this. We need to climb this. Get subscribing. Everyone subscribe. Tell your friends to subscribe. Tell their friends to subscribe. Tell all your family members to subscribe. Let's do it. The more subscribers we have, the broader a coalition of Rail Natter maniacs will be watching this stuff, and then therefore telling everyone about transport and how important it is. So we can do this stuff. We have the capability to do this stuff. We can and should. And the last thing I want to say is that I will be, thanks to everyone who sent their application to be production assistant, I've now created my shortlist. So I'll be emailing everyone out shortly, and then we'll be doing some interviews. But what a fantastic high quality of applications. Thanks to everyone who sent one in. Rail Natter is going to get a bit more slick, I would hope. Probably a little bit more presence on a couple of other social media platforms. So let's see what's going to be happening. It's going to be exciting. In which case, that's all. Look, you've had a Rail Natter. We've run a little bit long, but only slightly long. Thanks so much for joining. We're going to have some fun next week, I hope. Or it's going to be a calamity, and I won't have managed to organise anything, and I'll have to improvise something. But I'm hoping that won't be the case. So, in the meantime, everyone, you take very good care of yourselves. We'll see you for the bonus episode to go through the other report at past. And I will see you later on. Cheerio, everybody. Cheerio. Cheerio.